The new Overwatch patch is coming in tomorrow, and we've talked a lot about how it should improve gameplay, but I think it's really important to break it down here today that for many players, if you aren't prepared, the changes might feel like a punch in the face, because that's how damage comes in on you if you're not positioned well in a new era of Overwatch where barriers are much more flimsy and not as ever present as they used to be. So to get you guys ready for the new way Overwatch will be playing, I've got a few clips to break down that are going to illustrate really smart positioning and pathing to things that are going to be very key to your Overwatch success moving forward. Now, our first example is going to be from the pro player for British Hurricane main support, Jofi. And the thing we want to highlight here is the positions that the entire defense takes. Ignore the result of the fight and everything else going on, but just keep in mind where all the different players on the team are setting up. This is what you might call a crossfire formation, where any character that is deemed a backline, both supports and soldier, are playing on the high ground because they're exploitable characters that want to put their value out and avoid getting hit. We've got the new Orisa set up on the objective, creating a pivot point for the team to play around, and Winston and Sombra flanking with their mobility, creating pincer attacks. This positioning style I may have called deathmatchy in the past, but it's going to be much more mainstay and required if you're an exploitable character to have good positioning, which is the major buff to this patch that everybody likes if you're a high-level player, but maybe a rude awakening if you jump into playing the game on this new patch and play in the very common deathball-y style that I see a lot of mid and lower ranked players doing. And that's what we're going to explain now, a contrast to the very common errors in positioning I see all over the place and how you can adapt high-level positioning to not get caught out and die. And this team fight's going to end up to be a major fail. I flank, pull some aggro towards me and some cooldowns, but my team gets shattered. As Genji, if you're facing the enemy death ball getting earth shattered, you're doing something very wrong. And this is much more obvious when we take the overhead view into account. Now, the funny thing about all of this is that just about everyone in the lobby right here has bad positioning. The entire enemy team's positioning's bad, and the entirety of our team isn't very good either. Why is that? Well, of course, if the payload is riding underneath this natural high ground for the defenders, you have to keep in mind that you do not have to go contest cart until it's getting close to the yellow box of victory. Focus on winning the team fight, especially when you're playing divey heroes like Winston and Genji. Look at all of this high ground that you have to utilize, and when the enemy is putting all of their team onto cart, it's very easy to exploit them by peering over the top from high ground and engaging down. The reason being is that it gives you vision advantage as well as an opportunity advantage, because any mistake the enemy makes in positioning, you more easily can drop down onto them, exploit, and since we're playing mobility characters, we can get back up to safety on the high ground, which the enemy will take longer to get to because they have to run up the stairs when they're not playing mobility characters. Now, what ends up happening in this clip is because my team is playing squared up against the Reinhardt like we're playing Deathball versus Deathball, they're all going to get shattered. And I point this out because I see this type of positioning in ranked all the time at the middle and lower ranks, where teammates are set up to, quote, defend as if they're playing a deathball comp, all bundled together, standing behind an imaginary shield that isn't there, which is a feeling you're going to have a lot more now that barriers break and also characters like Winston are going to be more viable. And when you play this way, of course, Reinhardt gets a free shatter. But if you remember to our earlier example, where all the exploitable characters in the EU Pro Pug games played up on high grounds, creating crossfires down onto the objective, imagine if our Genji friend got pocketed by the Mercy safely up top as the cart goes underneath to join in on this pincer attack flank. This way, when his Winston teammate comes in and drops a bubble to engage onto the backline, well, Ryan's way out of position. Our mobility makes the death ball characters have bad positioning. This is Dive Principles 101, but we haven't played this style in Overwatch for like 2 years, is it now? It's been a long time, but this is how it goes. All the mobility characters attack the squishies, you go in, steal the lunch money from the squishy characters, and get out before the big brawly tanks can and punish you. That's how you have to play mobility in Overwatch, and it's going to be much more key for you to be able to do this, make these kind of reads, and establish high ground, and know when to ignore the objective. So important. When the enemy's got cart control, but it's not near the checkpoint, that's a key point for you to think about flanking, getting map control. Unless you're playing extremely brawly characters, which I know have been meta for quite some time, so it can get confusing, the payload is only important to you once it starts to get close to the checkpoint. Before that, you want to establish map control and set up good team fights that you can win by getting eliminations. Because Overwatch is going to be playing a lot more proactive instead of reactive, you'll need to be making more decisions like this because this type of gameplay is going to be more featured on the upcoming patch. One more example for you. Our gold Winston friend here is placing the bubble out in front of his team as if he's playing Reinhardt. Rather than setting up for a clean dive onto squishies in the back, he's more brawling and controlling the front line, which Winston is very weak at. And this is important for tank players as well as damage players to coordinate with your tanks. You want to make sure that you're fighting in a spot where your damage is going to be effective. Here we got Doomfist set up, and he's actually in a great position when the enemy come out, but he's got to be able to wait and play defensively now that we've controlled this open space. It's a big problem for the team if we face into the choke, drop our resources at the choke just to fight something we can't kill as Winston, because it leaves our Doomfist high and dry with nothing to fight. He can't go in with you here because if he does, he's going to die. Instead, what you need to do is allow for the Deathball style comps to begin to take a little bit of space first so that you can create some separation in open space. If you try to engage them in a close area, it's very easy for them to funnel all of their damage, huddle around each other, and stay alive. Whereas Winston Bubble or diving in with Wrecking Ball or any kind of flank, which is going to be more effective, I think, coming up, it does way more when the enemy begin to take a bit of space. Then when this Winston Bubble comes through, it becomes a lot more tricky for the enemy to get their healing, their focus fire, everything else to work out. Now, where exactly you place the bubble is all the difference in this, becoming super effective, but the point is the timing of it needs to be when your damage wants to engage. And the key thing to remember, tank players, is that in this new era where you're not going to have barriers forever to keep yourself or your team alive, if you're already controlling space that the enemy needs to take into, wait. Just wait around a corner. You don't need to constantly be face tanking, which is something that I haven't brought up in actual years, but it's going to be important again. Don't you worry. It's important for the tank to know when to stop taking damage. And then on the other end of it as well, you do need your team to properly avoid taking peeks when you can't peek either. I know this becomes a very tough dichotomy to work around for lower tier players, either as the tank or as the tank's teammate, because you may feel, okay, well, in this instance, Frito, my Doomfist teammate held good positioning, and if we as Winston play a little bit more passive, we could have synced up with a good engage with him. What about if my DPS or support is peeking needlessly, constantly? Do you really want me to stand back and wait while they overpeak and die? That does create a problem. And it's going to be an even bigger problem than it was before because there simply isn't enough barrier resource to go around. You used to be able to toss a barrier in front of that player's face more easily, but you have far less of that now. So in some ways, what I expect to happen is that main tanking is going to get harder at the lower ranks because of this, either for players who struggle to maintain their barrier or their discipline on when they should be peaking for themselves or their teammates. Both of it will make it more difficult. But I assure you, if you do these things better than the enemy, you can get more value. But it may turn out that playing off tanks who are better at fighting and brawling more frequently, and I have explained this before in a previous video where I started a new account on the PS4, but something to consider if your teammates are taking peaks that you can't cover as a main tank and they won't stop doing it, you have to consider swapping your tactics. If you play much more aggro as a main tank, it might just get you killed too, and then it's two people feeding, not just one, and you still lose the team fight anyway. Other picks that you can consider is swapping to Zarya, where you actually can gain a benefit from your teammate feeding. If they want to jump into damage so bad, at least you'll get charge out of it. And the other option is playing Wrecking Ball, who has the movement capabilities and self-sustain to be able to make tons of space by himself and can play much more ignorantly, whereas the other tanks need to be more disciplined on their decision making and need a little bit more teamwork in order to survive. So Quick recap at the end of the video, things that I want you guys to remember when going into this new patch of Overwatch. If you're a squishy exploitable character, you should always be looking for safe positioning, not the objective. The objective is the tank's responsibility. They've got the durability and cooldowns to contest it. Unless you're playing a super durable character with power crept cooldowns, we're about getting those flanks, getting the high ground, getting map control and more powerful angles across the map so you can crossfire to win team fights. It's going to matter so much now that there isn't infinite shields to block those flanks. And if you're a tank, make sure that you're either using voice comms to try to get your teammates in line with how much shielding you have to provide and try to get them disciplined to hide away from damage when you don't have enough barrier to block, and only use barrier when you're actually trying to get into the fight. The classic poke at the choke forever and stand there for 10 minutes because you have so much barrier to go around. That kind of dead in Overwatch because barriers break so fast now. If you're indecisive with your tank movement, you're going to fairly easily get blasted. A lot of the things we're talking about today were fundamental principles of Overwatch before the extreme power creep began to set in, and with big sweeping nerfs like Blizzard's putting through to barriers, a lot of those ideas are starting to come back. Brawly sustain on the objective, especially with characters like Mei, Reaper, Doomfist, and the new Orisa, may still be quite competitive at higher tiers of play, but if you really learn to maximize flanking and getting off angles and crossfires, that playstyle doesn't hold up as well as it used to because there simply isn't enough protection, meaning that similar to the GOATS era, teams trying to play that style are going to need to be much more coordinated, and we know that's probably not going to happen in ranked. So you can expect these tactics to work much better on the new patch. I'm sure we'll be discussing this much more as the weeks go on. I'm excited to get onto ranked and try out all the new hero interactions. If you are as well, please be sure to leave the video a like. It really does help us out and lets us know that you're enjoying the content. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and be sure to hit the bell icon so that you actually get notified when our videos go live. Link to the description is our Twitter, where we tweet out news, updates, and dank memes. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. We'll see you guys next time.